Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat. Resolves.
Right.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello, I'm DJ. This is the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel, and today I'm breaking down the Jund Commander 2018 deck. It's called Nature's Vengeance, and it has Lord Windgrace at the helm. Let's talk about the three Jund commanders in this deck. First off, we have Lord Windgrace. 2 black, red, green for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. +2, discard a card, then draw a card. If a land card was discarded this way, draw an additional card. -3, return up to 2 target land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And a -11, destroy up to 6 target non-land permanents, then create 6 2/2 green cat warrior creature tokens with Forest Walk. So Lord Windgrace is great, but before I get into talking about him, let's talk about the 2 other commanders that can be found in this deck. Gyrus, Waker of Corpses is X. Black, red, green for a 0/0 legendary Hydra. Gyrus, Waker of Corpses, enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. Whenever Gyrus attacks, you may exile target creature card with lesser power from your graveyard. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card that's tapped and attacking. Exile a token at the end of combat. So this is a Jund Hydra that deals with stuff in your graveyard, giving you tons and tons of value. I actually made a deck tech specifically on this commander, and you're going to notice it doesn't really match up with the deck tech that I'm going to talk about today. So if you want to learn about Gyrus, go ahead and click on the link that's coming up right now. There'll also be one in the description. Search for it because it's a really cool deck. But it's more of a creature toolbox deck. It's not a lands matter deck. Let's talk about Thantis, the War Weaver. This Jund spider, it's a legendary spider. 3 black, red, green for a 5/5 spider. It's got vigilance and reach. All creatures attack each combat if able. Ooh, very interesting. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Thantis the War Weaver. So this causes chaos, making everyone attack, but it's like a spider waiting there because it has vigilance, and then when things attack you, you get +1/+1 counter and you can probably block it with your Thantis. This doesn't really match with any of them. In fact, these all feel so disjointed. They don't have much synergy with each other. It's a little bit weird. I mean, I guess Gyrus and Thantis both have to be attacking, but Lord Windgrace kind of wants you to dirtle around with lands. And being the face of this deck and having so many Lands Matters cards in this deck, I think I'm going to go with Lord Windgrace as the commander to lead this. So if I'm going to be upgrading this deck and breaking it down, I'm going to have Lord Windgrace as the leader of it, and I really want to focus on lands. Lord Windgrace matches so well with the land strategy because it's card draw in the command zone, and it's also ramp in the command zone if we can get some lands into our graveyard. That sounds pretty great. One strategy that's really prevalent in this deck is landfall, so I'm going to lean into the landfall, giving me more landfall triggers and also more landfall payoffs. I also want to pay attention to a land engine as I go through this whole deck. I want to be able to put lands onto the battlefield, put lands into my graveyard, take lands out of my graveyard, just shuffle lands around, and hopefully I get advantage whenever I do that. So that's the land engine. And the last thing I want to do is wind. If we get a ton of lands on the battlefield, or if we have such a great engine that we can just move lands all over the place, do we do anything? Or hopefully we win the game if we set up our engine, right? So we have to pay attention to what we're getting if we're moving all these lands around. The first thing I want to talk about is how much lands matter. One of the things about this deck is I feel like there's actually a lot of glaring omissions to a Lands Matters deck. The reason why we want a Jund's Land Matter commander is because there's so many awesome Jund legendaries that deal with lands. And so it's a no-brainer to include cards like Omnath Locus of Rage, the Gitrog monster, Titania Protector of Argoth. All of these synergize so well, and yet they're left out of the precon. Omnath has probably one of the best landfall abilities out there. And Lord Windgrace synergizes with landfall abilities. Heck, a lot of the deck has landfall triggers in it. The Gitrog monster deals with lands going to the graveyard. Oh my gosh, Lord Windgrace literally does that, yet there's no Gitrog monster in the deck. Same thing goes with Titania Protective Argoth. All of these cards work so well together, yet they're not to be found. So you need to go out and create a deck and put these awesome commanders in there. I would also think to include Borborygmos Enraged. It doesn't synergize quite as well as all these other ones, but it's such a fun, huge Cyclops. Come on, I know you want to do that. And it's got some powerful abilities on it, even though it doesn't quite synergize as amazingly as all these others. Another thing I want you to add is Sylvan Safekeeper. These are such powerful creatures, you do want to protect them. And Sylvan Safekeeper, more land, synergies, I love it. One thing that's great is that it is actually a land synergy to send lands to the graveyard because of how all of these creatures interact with them, including our commander. So a card like Harrow is amazing. It ramps you, it's instant speed, and it puts a land to the graveyard for you to get back later. So other cards like Scape Shift and Crop Rotation are equally as good because they put lands in the graveyard and get you exactly what you want. Harrow gets you basics, I mean it ramps you. But the other ones can give you land selection, and in a deck that's going to have tons of different lands in it, that is amazing. Scape Shift also has the added benefit of comboing out. If you've played Modern, you might have run into Scape Shift. What happens is that it fetches Valakut and a bunch of mountains and sometimes multiple copies of Valakut, and it just domes people. Yet we can't quite do that in Commander. We don't have multiple copies of Valakut. It's harder to manipulate that. It's harder to Scape Shift people out, and the land base is way skewed green. This deck is like 75% green, and the last 25% is split between red and black. So being able to have as many mountains as we need to Valakut someone to death is unlikely, unless we play a card called Prismatic Omen. That means that all of our lands are mountains in addition to their other types. So when Valakut comes in, it's just ba-bow, 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 ba-bow. It's kind of a fun little 2-card combo, and Scape Shift is good enough with lands, so I think I'd include Prismatic Omen, and also has the added benefit of making Cabal Coffers work. I mean, it's like a second Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, and I do want tons and tons of mana that Cabal Coffers can make me, so I think it is a nice inclusion. Another card that's sadly gonna go up in price. It's so good, it's so good, and it was not included in this deck. It's Realms Uncharted. 2 and a green for an instant. Search your library for 4 land cards with different names and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. The chosen cards are put into your graveyard and the rest are in your hand. Then shuffle your library. This is a Gifts Ungiven for lands. And if you don't recognize Gifts Ungiven, it's because it's banned in Commander. It's considered too good. And we have the land equivalent of it, and it's just fine. It's just a card that never sees play. But trust me, it is so good to find exactly what you need. And cards that get lands out of your graveyard, yeah, that's even better. It means that you have access to 4 of the best lands in your deck. You can search them up and immediately have access to them. So speaking of which, we can also get lands out of our graveyard with cards like Life from the Loam, Ramunap Excavator, and Crucible of Worlds, none of which are in the precon, but are solid choices. I love that Crucible of Worlds was just reprinted, so it'll be a little bit cheaper. We can also get cards out of our graveyard en masse. Splendid Reclamation, return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. The Mending of Dominaria, have to go through a few little steps, get some value along the way, but then all the lands back onto the battlefield. Or World Shaper helps you mill and then all back onto the battlefield. Yeah, these will generate us tons of lands, huge amounts of ramps. So now we're picturing getting lands into the graveyard, getting them back onto the battlefield, and of course moving these lands around could give us landfall triggers, could do a lot of benefit, but we're also wondering in our heads, what are we going to do with all of this mana? You know, there's no mana sink in our command zone, so we have to think, okay, well, what are we going to do with all this? But before we get there, let's play more lands! Azusa, Lost But Seeking, Oracle of Moldiah, Wayward Swordtooth, Mina and Den, Wild Board. All of these are also not in the precon. I mean, they're still such solid cards. Oracle of Moldiah is crazy. These cards will give us tons of advantage because this deck has a pretty high land count, so it's going to allow us to put a ton of lands on the battlefield. And there are a few enchantments that do something similar. Exploration, Burgeoning, also both not in the precon. But if we're putting all these lands into play, we could get a lot of ramp. Lotus Cobra. This is interesting because it's a mana dork that rewards you for your ramping. Lotus Cobra can be so explosive. Now you might think this little dork is not impactful enough, but you'll be surprised, because when you chain one ramp spell into another ramp spell into another relevant play, all because of this little snake, you're going to be really impressed. And finally, let's turn land drops into card draw. This is going to be one of the most important things. One thing that's great is that it's on Lord Windgrace, but Tireless Tracker gives us clues for our land drops, and if we can get Nissa Vital Force to ultimate, only one tick up and then a tick down, you get an emblem with whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. I choose to draw all of the cards. So far, we've described a lot of ways to move lands around and gotten some benefit, but mostly the benefit is more lands and some card draw. So we need some payoffs here. And one of the payoffs that's built into the precon is sort of a token strategy, primarily around landfall. Avenger of Zendikar is a headlining card, giving us tons of plants and then allowing these landfall triggers to water them, getting them bigger and bigger and bigger. And to go with it, Turn Timber Sower is amazing, also creating plant tokens, giving you an awesome sack outlet for these creatures. We also have Worm Harvest, which can go crazy, turning lands into tokens. Rampaging Baloths is a little bit dirtily, but yeah, when you put a few lands on the battlefield, people are gonna be looking real closely at this beast-generating machine. And finally, another new card, Nesting Dragon. This is amazing. What great landfall. I'm super excited for this creature as well. Landfall is pretty well represented in the precon, but a few things we could add. Zendikar's Royal gives us 2/2s with every land drop, and Obnixilis the Fallen drains our opponent when we have land drops, and grows them as well. Obnixilis the Fallen could be a win condition on his own if you have a huge Splendid Reclamation or Escape Shift that sends a lot of lands on the battlefield. And of course, let's not forget about other tokens, Omnath Locus of Rage that has landfall, Titania Protector of Argoth, another great token creator if we send lands to the graveyard. I want to supplement those token producers with a few more powerful creatures. Multani Yavamaya's Avatar. This creature has supremely impressed me. It has trample, it's huge, and it's resilient. It might be just a big dumb beater, but I've seen it do so much work. Uvenwald Hydra is another beater, but has the added benefit of a tutor right on it. I think that's spectacular. You can get whatever land you need, and you got a big dumb beater left over. And finally, we have Worldbreaker. This is just recursive hate. We can just keep taking things out. And I love that it's a cast trigger and exiles. It just makes it so resilient. I mean, it's expensive, and it's expensive to get back, but that doesn't matter. It's still a solid card. And then I want to discuss another huge payoff of having tons of lands on the battlefield. And that can be turning your lands into creatures themselves. Sylvan Awakening, Natural Affinity, and Root Awakening. They all do different things, but they're all super cool. Sylvan Awakening turns all your lands into 2/2 elementals that are reach, indestructible, and haste. The indestructible is great. You can just swing in and try and get a bunch of damage through. I think this is a really fun card. Natural Affinity is at instant speed. It says all lands become 2/2 creatures until end of turn. Sometimes if someone board wipes, you can turn that into an Armageddon. And guess who's prepared to come back from an Armageddon? I don't know, the person who has World Shaper, Splendid Reclamation, your own Commander, the Mending of Dominaria, Life from the Loam, Crucible of Worlds, Ramanop Excavator. Yeah, you are prepared to have the board wiped away of lands. This can also be a game-winning play if you have a Titania on the battlefield. And then Root Awakening can turn your lands into 2/2 creatures, but it's also a huge ramp spell. Many of the times you'll have so much mana, you can tap it all, floating mana, cast Root Awakening, and then untap everything just to give you that explosive boost of mana. Let's talk about some other land synergies. We have Sylvan Advocate. I described turning things into 2/2s. Imagine if they have +2/+2. Yeah, pretty great. Walker of the Wilds is a mana sink that turns your lands into huge elementals, and Kamal Fist of Krosa is so dangerous. So you can actually animate your opponent's lands, making them wipe their own land-based away if they threaten a board wipe. You can also just start animating lands and then spending excess mana into pumping everything up. If you have ways to get your lands back and ways to pump them, why not make them fight for you? Hissing Quagmire, Lava Claw Reaches, Raging Ravine, Treetop Village, even Colony Garden, giving you a tiny little plant that maybe you can water with an Avenger of Zendikar. All of these are great synergies that work so well with all the cards in this deck. And finally, we have finishers that use all of the mana that we're generating. Cut deals 4 damage to target creature. No, just kidding. It's ribbons. X, black, black. Each opponent loses X life. Yeah, that's what we're going for here. Along with Torment of Hailfire, just for big enough, just makes people go crazy. Genesis Wave is really good. We do have a few spells, but we have a lot of permanents, specifically lands, so I know a lot of people that just run a value Genesis Wave in decks like this, and it's usually pretty good. Finally, I'd like to talk about a few areas to explore. There's so many ways that you can customize this deck, because at the core, it's just a lands matter ramp deck. And you'll be moving lands around, you'll be getting value, but honestly, you can take it in tons of different directions. You can lean into that animate the land strategy I talked about. You can even go with more of a spells matter and go deeper into the Genesis Wave, Cut to Ribbons, Torment of Hailfire, Exsanguinate route. This deck already has a really strong token theme. You can lean into that. So there's tons of different places to go. I also want to just share a few pieces of control with you. Subterranean Tremors. I think this is really great because you do have a lot of creatures, but not as many as your opponents do in many situations. And as long as you have your lands, you're kind of okay. So board wipes won't hurt you very much. And how many artifacts is this deck going to carry? Probably just a Soul Ring. That might be just it. Maybe a Horn of Greed, okay? But not a lot, so wiping away artifacts could be really powerful. So Subterranean Tremors or even a Shatterstorm, Vandal Blast can be really good. Let's talk about effects like Wildfire. I think that limiting other people's mana could be really strong in a deck that is so good at getting lands onto the battlefield. Wildfire is not a pure Armageddon effect, it doesn't wipe away all of the lands, but it could keep some other strategies in check and put lands into your graveyard so it can actually feed your ramp. Next we have Chandra Flamecaller. I have Chandra here specifically, but I really like the idea of wheel effects in this. Discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1 is Chandra's 0 ability. Being able to refill your hand is great, and being able to discard all of those lands and use your graveyard as a resource, yeah, is also really great. Notice Chandra also has this minus that deals all the damage to all the creatures. We could be a very controlling deck where we keep the board clean of creatures until we're ready to deploy our threats. Finally, we have a card that could just control the entire game. Constant Mists. This card is insane. 1 and a green for an instant with buyback of sacrificing a land. It's a fog. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn. Yeah, sacrificing a land is not a huge cost in a deck like this. Sometimes it's actually pretty good. Sometimes you might actually just Constant Mists buyback just to send a land to the graveyard so you have something to bring back next turn. Yeah, Constant Mists is going to be a house, and some decks can't beat it. So you need to run this card. And then finally, I can't leave without explaining a little bit more about the mana base. The mana base can totally work for you. Having lands that go to the graveyard are great with this commander, but the precon doesn't really have a lot of them. They have 3 cycle lands. They have all of the slow fetches. It's not a very compelling list of cards. So just adding a few, like other cycle lands, Sheltered Thicket, Canyon Slough, or I know these are really expensive, but the fetch lands, Wooded Foothills, Verdant Catacombs, Bloodstained Mire, people that really want to go in on this deck are going to run even all the off-colored ones as well. But one of the fun parts of this lands deck is the versatility of its mana base. Kessig Wolfrun. This can end a game. This is like a fireball on a land. Glacial Chasm. Yeah, this puts the brakes on the game for you to actually get your engine going a little bit more. Bojuka Bog is a kill spell for someone's graveyard. You know that sometimes Bojuka Bog feels like a board wipe for some opponents, just like, oh, all my resources are gone. You can feel it sometimes in this deck too. And so with this huge toolbox of lands, I do want to say crop rotation is amazing, and I think you should save it for kind of like a combat trick. You know, instant speed, crop rotation. By the way, I have Kessig Wolfrud now, kill you. By the way, crop rotation, Glacial Chasm, yeah, you can't, that attack, that Alpha Strike with that Crater Hoof doesn't do anything to me. Oh, I'll cast crop rotation, get a Bajuka Bog, suddenly the thing you're trying to Snapcaster back is gone. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we want to do in this deck. That's the kind of plays that we're excited about. So what do I think about this deck, and what do I think about Lord Windgrace? Well, I'm honestly a little bit disappointed in the precon. I feel like the commanders, all three of the Jund commanders, take us in completely different directions, although I legitimately like them all. I think that Lord Windgrace is a solid commander and really good for this land strategy, and I wanted a Jund lands commander. But the way that the deck comes together feels disjointed. I think the problem comes in budget. So many of the cards that deal with lands can cost a little bit of money. In fact, this deck that I've described to you is quite expensive. And I know that in order for it to really hum, you need those fetch lands, you need some of these expensive lands that I've been describing. And effects like Azusa is not cheap, Life from the Loam and Crucible and Scapeshift, all of those are above $10. And so I think that they've had their hands tied a little bit by trying to create this cool Lands Matter deck when it's way more powerful and way more popular and way more expensive than they anticipated. I'll have a link in the description to a deck list where you can see the kind of deck that I'm going to play. It doesn't have all of the upgrades, but it's certainly not budget. If you're interested in a few budget replacements, go ahead and check out the Command Zone where Josh and I talk about upgrading this deck. We break it down, we talk about what 10 cards are necessary on a budget to really make this deck work. I want to thank TCGplayer.com. TCGplayer.com sponsors the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. If you click on the link in the description, it'll take you to a place where you can buy these Commander decks. Oh my gosh, thank you TCG Player, and thank you to my patrons. They stand by me and support me, and I want to thank all of you patrons. Thank you so much. You've been such a huge help as I've been working to get these videos done. Speaking of which, there will be more videos. There's always more videos, everyone. It's Commander 2018. Just stay tuned. Why don't you subscribe, hit that bell icon, because I don't have a schedule anymore. They're just videos coming at you all days of the week. You don't know. All right. I'll see you all really soon. Bye.